$1,977,722,224. Is that correct? 1,977,722,224.
Yep. 3 sevens, 3 deuces.
If
Okay.
you could please mute your microphone, it is playing in board chambers. Thank you.
Excellent. We were checking. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a special board meeting of the San Joaquin County Board of Supervisors. The meeting is called to order at 2:33. We will begin with a moment of silence, silent reflection, or silent prayer. Thank you. Supervisor Elliott, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance today?
Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the republic for which
Thank you. For the record, this is the special board meeting of Monday, September 28th, 2020. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Supervisor Villapudua,
Present.
Supervisor Patty,
Present.
Supervisor Nguyen,
Here.
Supervisor Elliott,
Here.
and Chair Miller.
Here. For the record, I'd like to note that Supervisors Villapudua and Patty are participating telephonically, so our votes will be taken via voice vote today. Now is the time for public comment on matters within the jurisdiction of the Board of Supervisors that are not listed on the agenda, and any matters listed on the consent agenda. Public comments are limited to 250 words or less and are accepted by email at sjcpubliccomments@sjgov.org. I'm going to ask the clerk if we have received any public comments via email, and if so, to please read them.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we have. The first comment is by Mary K. Barnes, who writes, as a longtime RN at SJGH, I have been through numerous contract negotiations. The current Board of Supervisors' actions to date seems to show us that the rest of the county, that you have no respect for the work and caring we are out in our community. Instead of directing your administration to negotiate, instead of ignoring us, does nothing but waste everyone's time. The millions you are spending on replacement workers is very wasteful and could be used for retention of our current nurses. I am very disappointed in all of you and your actions. They speak louder than words. Instead of sitting behind your desks, I invite all of you to come down and see the hard work that we have been doing. I would love to give you a tour and hear your explanations as to why you have been so disrespectful to our constituents. The next comment is from a dedicated county nurse who writes, my name is Kim Baraga, and I am an ICU nurse at SJGH. I have worked there for 15 years. I love what I do and stay for the population I work with, for the staff that shares the same feeling. I am so sad and devastated to hear that the county has chosen to put money and effort into finding RN replacements instead of meeting with us and coming to an agreement. I'm sad because our staff in ICU is so new, 2 to 3 years or less, only 4 to 5 nurses with more than 6 years. I am feeling defeated by an employer that is supposed to value me as one of experienced nurses in a specialty unit that cannot afford to lose anymore. I always said I'd retire from here, but as time goes on, I just don't know if I can hold on to that anymore. I have recently been offered a position in another hospital. I don't want to leave. My home is SJGH, but SJGH doesn't see me that way. I really hope this all comes to an end soon, as many experienced nurses as myself feel the same way. Thank you for taking the time to read this. I hope you can feel my pain as I wrote this. I had tears rolling down my face, as this might be the last time I fight for something I deserve from San Joaquin County. The next comment is anonymous. And they write, San Joaquin County nurses have been without a contract for nearly 2 years. After our strike in March, there have been no efforts made by the county to reach an agreement in our contract. Our nurses have been tirelessly fighting this pandemic on the front lines for months, caring for COVID patients without the appropriate PPE, managing surges of patients without adequate staffing, putting ourselves at risk of COVID exposure. Now that we have given notice of our intent to hold another strike, we find out that there will be an emergency meeting on Monday to discuss approving $4 million for strike replacement workers. Instead of spending taxpayer dollars on strike replacement workers who cannot care for our patients as safely as county nurses can, why can't an emergency meeting be held to discuss ways the county can come to an agreement with the nurses of San Joaquin County and settle a fair contract so that we are not forced to strike and can stay working to take care of our patients? This is shameful, and in my 18 years during a dedicated employee at SJGH, I have never felt so undervalued, unappreciated, and disrespected by San Joaquin General Hospital and the county. Please do not let SJGH chip away at our contract, taking away protections for our nurses and patients. Give us fair and equitable wages so that we can recruit and retain experienced nurses to protect the safety of our patients and ensure that they are being given the highest quality nursing care. The next comment is from Chantel Dyer, who writes, Dear board members, we are good people getting paid less than everyone else to do a job that is so incredibly important and detrimental to the community. I am just asking you to be fair and consider coming to a consensus so we can get a fair contract. An anonymous letter writes, I'm a registered nurse at San Joaquin General Hospital, and it has come to my attention that the county is not willing to meet with our nurses union to discuss a fair contract. Instead, the county wants to hold an emergency meeting to approve another $4 million of county funds towards replacement staff who are not from our county or state to work while we strike. County dollars are being wasted and spent on replacement nurses who will not circulate their income back into our local economy. This is absurd and an insult to the overly worked and physically, mentally drained RNs who pour their life into helping care for those in San Joaquin County. We have seen a revolving door of hardworking, quality nurses leave for better opportunities because the county falls behind in comparable wages to surrounding hospitals. So much of our county dollars are being wasted day in and day out on training nurses who will in turn leave once the opportunity arises. The county must meet with our nurses and agree to a fair contract so SJGH can retain our nurses, who a majority reside within the county lines. These nurses in turn will put their income back into our local economy. Why waste millions of dollars on travel replacement nurses? Jamie Walker writes, the nurses at San Joaquin General Hospital don't strike because we don't care. We strike because we do care. We care about our patients and the nurses taking care of the patients. However, we cannot keep good nurses without competitive pay and benefits. Since our last strike in March, we have lost 103 nurses. The county puts all this money into hiring travelers when that money could be put to the nurses who live in the community and love the patients that they take care of. We want competitive wages so we can retain quality nurses. We want SJGH to be a place nurses want to work at. Instead, it had been a place nurses get their experience and then leave for more pay and less workload. Thank you. Ashley Raymond, a nurse at San Joaquin General Hospital, writes, I am writing as a nurse impacted by the decisions that are being made about my future with county. As a resident of San Joaquin County and employee at SJGH, I would like to see a fair resolution of our contract dispute. I understand that both parties may have different motives, but please keep us in mind before spending $4 million on contract nurses. These nurses leave our patients, your residents, vulnerable and act in a dangerous manner. This $4 million can be saved by allocating these resources towards our contract. I and my fellow nurses have worked hard during this pandemic. I have risked my life and my family's lives to come home and do my job. All I ask is that you protect my patients, provide me with the proper equipment to protect myself, and show that I am valuable to you with a proper contract. I want to work. Please save us from striking and allocate this $4 million into a fair contract. An anonymous writer writes, can someone please explain how it is okay to hold an emergency meeting to discuss wasteful spending on yet another $4 million on strike nurses, as opposed to calling an emergency meeting to help resolve and come to an agreement on a fair contract? And this is after already having spent $4 to $5 million on strike nurses in March. This is all money that could be spent on settling a fair contract with San Joaquin General Hospital nurses rather than flushing it down the drain. We have a hard enough time recruiting, let alone retaining nurses due to the fact that we do not have a competitive wage. And on top of that, SJGH wants to reverse some of the hard-earned progress that we have made by offering takeaways. How is that fair? We want progression, not regression, in order to offer our patients and community the safest care possible. Judith A. Walsh writes, as a registered nurse who has worked at San Joaquin General Hospital for 20 years, I'm writing to share my extreme dismay and disappointment with the board, who has once again failed to support the registered nurses of San Joaquin County and the community it serves. After nearly 2 years of bargaining and failed negotiations, the Board of Supervisors has remained silent as the administration has refused to address the RN's concerns about safe patient care, safe staffing, PPE, and radical contract changes. Just last week, Supervisor Kathy Miller committed to calling an emergency meeting of the board to discuss our contract. Today, it has come to our attention that rather than discussing our contract as promised, the emergency meeting will be held to discuss only the approval of a $4 million contract with HSG for strike replacement workers. During one of the most dangerous pandemics in history, management has violated safe staffing laws, which endangered county residents, failed to provide sufficient PPE to allow RNs to care for COVID-19 patients, and demanded cuts to our contract that would only serve to result in high nurse turnover and potentially lead to another staffing crisis. Nurses voted overwhelmingly to go on strike because we see no other option, due to management's unwillingness to even come to the negotiating table. When Supervisor Miller agreed to an emergency meeting to discuss the contract and imminent strike, there was a glimmer of hope. However, once again, we are disappointed by the board's lack of support and responsiveness. The next comment is from an anonymous writer who wrote, I have been a nurse at San Joaquin General Hospital for 5 years and have continued to see that nurses are not a priority. We have been trying to obtain a contract for almost 2 years but have gotten nowhere. Apparently, the county has money to spend on travelers and strike nurses, but refuses to invest any money into the nurse who gives their blood, sweat, and tears every day. The proposed takeaways are also unsafe for both the patients and the nurses. The county is able to meet to discuss spending more money on strike nurses but cannot be bothered to call a meeting to discuss our contract. Maybe your priorities need to be reevaluated. Treat your nurses with some decency and come back to the bargaining table. The next comment is by Catherine Magarang, who writes, I am a resident of San Joaquin County and have worked as a county registered nurse, public health nurse, for almost 20 years. I am appalled that the Board of Supervisors is meeting to discuss strike replacement workers instead of RN contract negotiations. The current focus of public health is the global COVID-19 pandemic. It is shocking that the board believes that any county RN, especially highly specialized public health nurses, can be easily replaced. The people of San Joaquin County deserve quality nursing care, and the registered nurses of San Joaquin County deserve a fair contract. The nurses deserve a contract that respects their nursing expertise, experience, and skills. Please use taxpayer money for a fair RN contract and not temporary replacement workers. Jessica Flores writes, to whom it may concern, I am writing as a nurse impacted by the decisions that are being made about my future with the county. As a resident of San Joaquin County and employee of San Joaquin General Hospital, I would like to see a fair resolution of our contract dispute. I understand that both parties may have different motives, but please keep us in mind before spending $4 million on contract nurses. These nurses leave our patients, your residents, vulnerable and act in a dangerous manner. This $4 million can be saved by allocating those resources towards our contract. I and my fellow nurses have worked hard during this pandemic. I have risked my life and my family's lives to come here and do my job. All I ask is that you protect my patients, provide me with the proper equipment to protect myself, and show that I am valuable to you with a proper contract. I want to work. Please save us from striking and allocate this $4 million into a fair contract. Another comment from an anonymous writer writes, the year 2020 is a critical moment in American life. Many foundational truths upon which our society is built have been called into question. Chief amongst these questions is what is essential. While answers to this question vary wildly, all sides agree upon one element: health is essential. One measure of what a government values is where it invests time, services, and capital. What then does the San Joaquin County Board of Supervisors value? Today, you will vote to approve $4 million in contingency staffing for San Joaquin General Hospital. This investment is not to protect the health and safety of San Joaquin County. It is to pay temporary workers during an impending nurse strike. Rather than empowering San Joaquin General Hospital management to continue their struggle against our nurses by funding this request, I implore you to use all legal means to pressure San Joaquin General Hospital management into settling their collective bargaining dispute with county nurses. At this critical moment, where the importance of health has never been more clear, the San Joaquin County Board of Supervisors can make a strong statement that they support the essential work of nurses and believe they deserve fair wages and benefits. Don't simply say you support our essential workers. Prove it. Next is an anonymous writer that writes to the board, I am an ER nurse. I've probably held one of your family members' hands in times of crisis. Can you sit for a while and finally discuss a contract for the nurses who are grossly undervalued in San Joaquin County so that you can stop paying traveling nurses higher wages and retain some staff who has invested in and cares for the community we all serve? I feel that this board has forgotten that we are all working for the same team, so please start acting like it. Calling an emergency meeting to fund strike replacement workers instead of addressing the root issue, the refusal to negotiate a fair contract, is like putting a Band-Aid on a scrape when there's a bone sticking out. It's time to do your jobs. Sincerely, a nurse who deserves more and, if needed, will find it elsewhere like so many before. The next comment is by Maria Perez, who writes, to whom it may concern, like many other nurses, I am impacted by the incoherent decisions that are being made about my future with the county. As a resident of San Joaquin County and employee at SJGH, I would like to see a fair resolution of our contract dispute that has been indignantly delayed for too long. I understand that both parties may have different perspectives, but I ask to keep your current employed nurses in mind before spending $4 million on contract nurses. Why would a county invest a large amount of fund on outside nurses rather than supporting their very own? As nurses, we all have worked hard during this pandemic that has hit home for many of us, to the extent that some of us decided to be apart from our loved ones to avoid putting them at risk. I personally risked my life and my family's lives to come here and do my job. All I ask is that you protect my patients, provide me with the proper equipment to protect myself, and show that we are all valuable to you with a proper contract. I love what I do and will continue to do what I can for my patients, but it would also mean a lot to have the consideration and support from you. Please save us from striking and allocate this $4 million into a fair contract. Vanessa Simones writes, hello, as an RN at County for the past 8 years, which I'm embarrassed to tell people most of the time, I'm extremely insulted at how shady and backhanded this group of elected officials is acting. You act as if you care about your staff, your community, but really all you care about is your bottom line. In our ICU, most of the nurses have less than 3 years of experience. When I started, they had 20 to 30 years. This is because the pay benefits are not competitive at all, and we are in a constant turnover of nurses. Patients are sicker, plus we have complicated traumas. It's completely unsafe and unethical. Currently, we are babysitting these traveling nurses who make 3 times what we make and are frankly incompetent. It's degrading and bringing morale way down. This decreases nurse satisfaction, patient satisfaction, and overall quality of care. Happy nurse, happy hospital. John Curry writes, to whom it may concern, I have been a registered nurse for 20 years in San Joaquin County and a lifelong resident as well. I know how hard healthcare workers toil and the risks they take. I am absolutely appalled that the San Joaquin Board of Supervisors would stall contract negotiations and even allocate several $1 million to resist legitimate negotiations. Maybe the board would like to try getting healthcare services from underpaid and overworked staff in overcrowded hospital and clinical conditions. When their family have health issues, where will they go to get care? Stop the insanity now and support the nurses who support you. Jessica Vasquez writes, To whom it may concern, my name is Jessica Vasquez. I am a nurse at ICU at San Joaquin General Hospital. I write to you today to please reconsider approving a $4 million grant to obtain strike nurses for San Joaquin General Hospital, attempting to reach a settlement with CNA. I have worked at SJGH for approximately 14 years. I left my primary job at Kaiser Hospital approximately 7 years ago to stay with SJGH full-time. I made this decision as I was compassionate about the patients and growth I was able to obtain in my skills at SJGH. I have never once questioned whether leaving Kaiser was a wise choice. I have to honestly say that this question has been lingering far too frequently in my mind. The fact that SJGH would rather reach out to obtain traveler nurses than reach an agreement is disheartening. I care 100% for my patients, and to see the care some of these nurses are providing saddens me. This could be you or your family needing care. I know they don't have the compassion and heart San Joaquin General Hospital nurses have for their job. I want to feel valued. I work very hard every day because I value my place of employment. I wish my employer would stop and notice the value we are worth. It's not about the money we are fighting for. As I already explained, I left Kaiser to work here. It's about the principle, the overall care to our patients and our community. I really hope a settlement can be made. The next comment is from Amanda Bloodgood, who writes, Dear Board of Supervisors, have you ever had a family member in the hospital? Have you ever been in the hospital? I'm sure you have. And who did you rely on most during that time for your care? That's right, a nurse. Please, please think of your spouse, your child, your parent, or whomever else is important to you, and what kind of care you want them to receive when in the hospital. You want top-notch, high-quality, safe, and specialized care. The nurses at SJC provide this on a daily basis. We give to others and do without ourselves because this is all we know. We have worked without a contract for 2 years now, through a pandemic, through staffing shortages, and without proper PPE, all the while putting ourselves and our families at risk for the sake of you and yours. We have thrown our hearts and souls into being frontline workers, and we deserve to be fairly compensated for doing so. We should not have to endure takeaways, and we should not have to watch new nurse after new nurse get their experience and leave to work elsewhere because they aren't fairly compensated. How is spending $4 million on contract workers even logical when that can do so much for the frontline nurses who already care for San Joaquin County patients? Please think of you and your family again. You want them to have a nurse who knows what he or she is doing. You want them to have a nurse who is experienced. The next comment is from Johnny Brooks, who writes, if the county could retain nurses, it would save the county millions of dollars. The money it costs to orient new nurses, as well as what county pays for travel nurses and registries needed when the nurses leave. County has lost 103 nurses since February 2020. $28,794 is the average cost to orient. $28,794 times 103 equals $2.9 million. Add this to the $8 million for the 2 strikes. It costs approximately $1.2 million for a 1% raise for all nurses. This money is reinvested in San Joaquin County, but instead the county is paying out-of-state traveling nurses another $8 million. If county would reinvest in keeping nurses in the county hospital, which is not going to happen with the current proposal that the county hospital is offering. Nurses can easily work at other area hospitals and make 20% more with better benefits as well. If they keep the nurses at the county, then the patients receive better care from skilled RN that are familiar with this hospital rather than travelers. Hazel Bellin writes, San Joaquin County Board of Supervisors, after nearly 2 years of bargaining, county management has demonstrated disrespect for us nurses. They proposed takeaways and rejected most of our proposals. They failed the frontline workers in their response to COVID by not providing adequate staff and PPE, putting our lives, the lives of our family, and the community at risk. With our wage being non-competitive, we continue to face dangerous staffing crisis and inability to recruit and retain nurses. Supervisor Kathy Miller scheduled an emergency meeting, but instead of discussing our contract, they will be discussing approval of $4 million contract of strike replacement workers. What a shame. Kelly Ann Hand writes, to whom it may concern. As a former SJGH ICU RN, I implore you to review the contract and package proposals. The nurses at SJGH are dedicated and loyal, and they work so very hard to provide the safest quality care to their patients. They deserve competitive wages and benefits in return. Jamaica writes, "Good morning. My name is Jamaica, and I am an aspiring nurse. It has come to my attention that the SJGH nurses are brought with saddening news to which their package proposal was never responded to. And now I believe that an emergency meeting is being scheduled not to help these nurses, but instead to discuss an approval to accommodate money to replace strike replacement workers. I think that it is unfair and saddening. First of all, I think this is a form of oppression to which you force your employees to subject to slavery, just as you could benefit from them. Why is it that it is better to pay $4 million for new workers, those who may not even do that job as your current nurses, to care for your patients? Why must you think it is better to keep your nurses understaffed, especially during this epidemic? I think you are saving more money proceeding with a contract for these healthcare workers, but instead you guys are fighting fire with more fire. Some, if not most, of these people served your hospital for so many years. The nurses work hard so that they can provide their patients with care, yet you guys slap them in the face by negotiating to replace them. I hope you will be able to approve a contract that will be beneficial to your nurses." Someone by the initials of LR wrote in, "Hello, BOS. I am writing in opposition to San Joaquin County spending even more of the county's financial resources on union busting instead of settling a fair contract with the frontline nurses who have put their lives in the line for their community. The county has already earmarked $4 million of taxpayer dollars to continue dragging on reaching a fair contract. This would be a gross misuse of public funds and is an unconscionable attack on the working nurses who live and work in San Joaquin County. I demand that you support the SJGH nurses in getting a fair contract instead of driving even more county resources into fighting them during a time of pandemic. I request that this be read aloud for public record." The next comment is by May Lowe, who writes, "I was born in San Joaquin General Hospital with a dream to grow up, become a nurse, and serve my community the same way it served my family. I was able to conquer that goal and have been working at the county hospital since 2016. I am so sad and disappointed to hear and see the way the Board of Supervisors are treating their nurses and their community. Our goal as healthcare professionals are to make this community a better place to live and work, but it is so hard to remain here as a loyal citizen when we don't receive support from our board. It has come to my attention that the board is having an emergency meeting today, not to discuss our contract, not to negotiate and meet us in the middle, but to approve $4 million on strike replacement workers. This is sickening, and the board is willing to shell this much in a span of 5 days on people who won't contribute to this community in the long run. If you're not willing to be the leaders this county needs, maybe it's time to step down so someone else can." Angela Almanes writes, "Good morning. It is imperative that you consider approaching a contract for your frontline staff fighting on the line every day, rather than the misappropriation of county funding for traveling nurses who have no ties to the county and pose a serious threat to patients in our community. It is shameful that the board has let this continue as long as it has." The next comment is from Connie Lehman, who writes, "To the San Joaquin County Board of Supervisors, I demand that you support the San Joaquin general nurses in getting a fair contract instead of driving even more county resources into fighting them during a time of a pandemic. These nurses are a lifeline to our community, and they deserve to be respected. Hundreds or thousands of our clients rely on these valuable professionals doing the work on the front lines every day of this pandemic and without a pandemic." Kelly Mertz writes, "In the past 7 months, 103 nurses have left employment with San Joaquin County, many of them leaving due to subpar wages and poor working conditions. This leaves the county with a cost burden of $2.9 million to train their replacements. This leaves the citizens of San Joaquin County being cared for by overworked, underappreciated nurses who often lacked adequate training, resources, and mentors. Nearly half of all ER nurses have less than 3 years of experience. With so many experienced nurses leaving the trauma room is frequently staffed by nurses that don't have all the necessary credentials required to work in this critical area. Additionally, the ER does not have enough MICNs to staff the radio as required in our trauma certification, often leaving one nurse to staff the position for 12 hours at a time, unable to take rest, meal, or even restroom breaks. This Board of Supervisors should be ashamed of themselves for allowing our hospital to fall into such a predicament. As the only trauma center in San Joaquin County, we are responsible for caring for patients from all walks of life. Victims of gunshot wounds and other violent crimes, car accidents, elderly patients who fall, and children injured in sporting events all land in our trauma room. If it were your family members, wouldn't you want their care to be done by nurses who were well educated, prepared, and not feeling rushed, tired, or hungry? I urge you to use your power for the betterment of San Joaquin County. The next comment is by Susan Gallegos of District 1, who writes, for nearly 2 years, San Joaquin County nurses have worked without a contract, and for the past 7 months, we have fought on the front lines against COVID-19, with the Central Valley being one of the hardest hit regions in California. We are the essential medical professionals that have been appreciated by the public, but not our employer. Once again, the San Joaquin Board of Supervisors has failed their nurses. This emergency meeting to discuss monies for replacement workers for an impending labor strike indicates you have no intention of coming to an agreement. I am baffled that, without hesitation, you are ready to use millions of dollars to keep nurses from serving our patients, but cannot prioritize contract negotiations. The public deserves to be made aware that San Joaquin County has no desire to invest in its own community and assets, yet is already to pander to our labor union for endorsement and votes in upcoming elections. If the Board of Supervisors are prepared to keep nurses from working under a fair contract, you must also be prepared for the direct consequences: the loss of highly experienced staff, the constant understaffing due to lack of retention, and the possibility of losing our trauma accreditation, all of which negatively impact our patients and community. If these outcomes are the best you can offer the constituency, you should reevaluate your purpose in public office. The next comment is by Carrie Curry, a retired RN, who writes, I am writing in opposition to San Joaquin County spending even more of the county's financial resources on union busting instead of settling a contract with the frontline nurses who have put their lives on the line for our community. The county has already earmarked $4 million of taxpayer dollars to continue dragging on reaching a fair contract. This would be a gross misuse of public funds and is an unconscionable attack on the working nurses who live and work in San Joaquin County. I demand that you support the San Joaquin general nurses in getting a fair contract instead of driving even more county resources into fighting them during a time of pandemic. These nurses are a lifeline in our community and they deserve to be respected. San Joaquin County is one of the hardest hit regions from COVID-19. Instead of figuring out how to spend county funding on PPE and healthcare services for our community members, the San Joaquin County Board of Supervisors are instead looking to waste millions of dollars on ways to attack the frontline healthcare workers who keep our community safe and healthy. The next comment is from Catherine Pacheco, who writes, it has been over 2 years that San Joaquin General Hospital nurses has been in contract. During this pandemic, board supervisors have continued to neglect nurses from their rightfully deserved fairness. SJGH lack resources, lack fair wages, lack staff, and lack confidence in this board. Instead of labeling frontline nurses as heroes, give them the contract they deserve. I left SJGH County more than 5 years ago because of the lack of working conditions. Unfair wages. It's sad that during this 5 years, the SJGH County has done little to improve these working conditions. I really hope this changes. The next comment is by Dottie Nygaard, who writes, I am writing in opposition to San Joaquin County spending financial resources for union busting instead of bargaining in good faith with the nurses of San Joaquin County General Hospital. Nurses have been on the front line of this pandemic working in unimaginable conditions without proper protective equipment, staffing, or resources. Nurses who take an oath to advocate for their patients and their community, much like the oath that each of you on that dais take to serve, protect, and work in the best interest of the citizens that elect you. The measures you are taking to block the recognition and commitment these nurses deserve demonstrates to this community your failure to do your job. You are misusing public funds, putting this entire county at risk. The citizens of San Joaquin County deserve leadership that is fiscally responsible and respectful of all workers that contribute to the validity of this district. Your actions today are contributing to the loss of nursing jobs as wages and a safe working environment continue to deteriorate, risking the health of this community. You need to take the monies you are allocating in an attempt to break down your nurses and invest in them. Invest in the recruitment and retainment of nurses, and you will get a much bigger financial return, as well as safer and healthier community. Nurses don't break, they rise. The next comment is from Ursula Fung, who writes, as a dedicated nurse who have worked at San Joaquin County for 8 years, I am writing to express my dismay and disappointment with the Board of Supervisors for failing to support the nurses in our county who have taken care of the sick in our community and worked tirelessly during this pandemic. Nurses have worked while risking their own lives during this pandemic with no proper PPE to care for the people in our community. They have worked even though the hospital were extremely short-staffed, and they have worked under unsafe conditions. It appalls me that you guys have called an emergency meeting to discuss approval of $4 million to get replacement nurses instead of meeting with the union to offer us a fair contract. We have been out of a contract for 24 months, and it is a slap in our face after all we've done for the community over the years, and especially during this pandemic. You guys should be ashamed. The next comment is by Rhonda Brooks, who writes, I cannot believe the funds county has budgeted and plans to spend for traveler RNs for this year is $16 million. The 2 strikes happening so far have used about half of that total. The funds spent so far could have satisfied any requests in the contract proposal offered by CNA, yet county would rather throw these funds away on temporary travel nurses than to invest in their local county nurses. I believe there is also funds budgeted for registry. Then county is worried about being in the red. Decisions such as this is what gets you there. Why not invest in your own county? The next comment is by Tim Robertson, Executive Director of the North Valley Labor Federation, who writes, I write in strong opposition to increasing the budget for paying an outside staffing agency for SJGH and encourage you instead to instruct county negotiations to move bargaining forward in concert with the nurses. This will ultimately save taxpayer money and show proper appreciation for the essential work they do every day. Spending another $4 million in taxpayer money to pay an outside staffing agency is an irresponsible use of public funds, when clear-eyed negotiations could have resolved this situation months ago and could do so right now. Let's save this money by working together towards a fair contract. If your goal is to represent the voters and taxpayers of San Joaquin County, it's a win-win. We'd be supporting local workers, being responsible stewards of taxpayer money, and provide well-deserved security to these nurses who have bravely fighting on the front lines of the global pandemic. Let's work together to act responsibly and support our nurses. You can do your part by imploring this county negotiators to work towards a fair contract for these nurses. The next comment is by Matthew Schaefer, who writes, I have been in labor representation for a long time, representing county nurses here and in neighboring counties for the last 6 years. Never before have I seen such doublespeak, misalignment of priorities, or wasteful spending. Since February of this year to the beginning of this month, the county had 103 nurses leave county service. The average cost to train each of these nurses replacement by the county's estimation of $28,794. This results in a loss of close to $3 million. The county's own estimation of the cost of the last strike replacement workers was around $3 million. The county mismanaged its response to the strike so badly that PERB issued a complaint, resulting in expensive and protracted litigation with the union and the possibility that the county will pay $1.5 million or more, by the county's own estimation, to RNs to remedy its unlawful threats and retaliatory actions. Now, despite our efforts to meet with the county to negotiate a settlement, the hospital is coming back to the county for $4 million more to spending fighting the RN's efforts to reach a contract. The amounts above alone could have resulted in a 9.5% raise for every nurse in the county and gone a long way in settling these protracted negotiations. The county should say no to this expensive and pointless request by hospital management and should direct the county negotiator to accept the union's most recent contract proposal. The next comment is by Cherie Lusgarten, who writes, I'm writing to you today in opposition of the county board seeking to spend even more money on the county resources for union busting instead of settling a contract with the frontline nurses who put their lives on the line to serve this community. Disgraceful. I ask that you read this letter into the record respectfully. The next comment is from an anonymous nurse who works in the county and writes, it is really shameful that the county is willing to hire travelers for $4 million and not have money to give to nurses who have been and working so hard for county and for better patient care. Last time spent more than $3 million, so that's about $7 to $8 million, which would have been really used to give wage increase to the nurses who work so hard. Really, really sad to see this. Please, please honor the hardworking nurses at county. Thanks. The next comment is anonymous and writes, my partner is a hardworking nurse at San Joaquin County Hospital. Please discuss the contract and imminent strike in today's emergency meeting. We are just looking for a fair compensation. And the last comment is a letter from Stockton Mayor Michael Tubbs, who writes, as mayor of the city of Stockton, I am forever grateful for the work of essential workers who have risen to the challenge of COVID-19. Especially healthcare workers who come face to face with this pandemic day in, day out to save lives and protect San Joaquin County families. This is why so many are distressed to see ongoing labor disputes with those very healthcare workers. Our nurses at San Joaquin General Hospital, represented by the California Nurses Association. After nearly 2 years of bargaining and a health pandemic, which has struck San Joaquin County particularly hard, I am concerned that San Joaquin County has yet to return to the bargaining table and instead is looking to further accelerate outsourcing its spending and circumvent the voice of these nurses. I know balanced partnership can work and that during this state of emergency, we must find ways to bargain in good faith and to make it work. I also know that unions and workers have the right to collectively bargain and strike, and I support their right to speak out on the issues important to them, especially when not just their livelihoods, but their lives are on the line. Finally, I do not want to see our nurses and local healthcare workers displaced by outsourcing, particularly not when San Joaquin County faces persistent health disparities that long precede the COVID-19 pandemic. I am appealing to you to lead San Joaquin County back to the table on negotiations and to not stymie any prospects of a fair agreement with outsourcing. And Madam Chair, that concludes the public comments for today.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who wrote in. We're going to move to our discussion item today, which is going to be presented by our San Joaquin General Hospital CEO, David Culberson. Mr. Culberson.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Board of Supervisors. Here to present and recommend a approval of an increase in the financial allocation to an agreement with HealthSource Global Staffing for contingent staffing, increasing the amount by $4 million for the period October 7th through October 12th, and that is a change of both of those dates from the published material on the special meeting agenda. So we're pushing this back to October 7th through October 12th, bringing the total not to exceed amount to $8 million for the period March 2nd through October 12th. And that October 12th date is also a change from the material that was included in the special meeting agenda. Those changes, those 3 date changes here, are really reflective of an update that we received. We had prepared a board letter late last week in anticipation of receiving a notice from the California Nurses Association of a strike potentially as early as Thursday or Friday. We actually received this 10-day strike notice on Saturday and the 26th of September. So we've pushed the start date of the contingency staffing back by 2 days and then continue it on to additional days. As I mentioned to you, we have received a strike notice from the CNA. Matthew Schaefer sent yourself, Brandy Hopkins, and myself a note on Saturday morning. We previously entered into an agreement with HealthSource Global back in March of 2020 to cover the strike that began in early March of this year. This plan here is really will allow us to increase the financial allocation and issue a new purchase order to Health Source Global for temporary staff for 5-day strike coverage for all all departments, including registered nurses, respiratory care practitioners, clinical lab staff, nursing assistants, dialysis techs, sterile processing techs, surgical techs, and echocardiogram techs. Basically, these are all of the essential employees we will have to maintain in the event a strike does begin by CNA, and also potentially cover for a sympathy strike by SEIU. Specifically, we anticipate 188 replacement RNs, and also, if needed, 98 non-RNs would be provided to cover the representative groups, again, if there is a sympathy labor action. Let's see here. We do anticipate to use Health Source Global replacement nurses for the entire 5-day minimum period mandated by the by the Health Source Global contract. The county's financial position prevents it from paying wages to both the replacement workers and its regular employees for the 5-day minimum period. Health Source Global does have a requirement of a 5-day minimum. As a result, the county as a result of this 5-day commitment, as well as not being able to pay both employed nurses and the Health Source Global nurses, the county will instruct striking nurses that unless they are specifically instructed otherwise, they may not return to work until after the conclusion of the 5-day minimum period with Health Source Global. This delayed reinstatement is not a furlough under Section 14.2.1 of the MOU between San Joaquin County and this California Nurses Association. And management will reserve the right to call in specific striking nurses at an earlier date if patient needs require. Basically, from this action, we will continue on operating hospital as necessary. We'll provide safe and adequate staffing from both nurses and, if needed, from non-nursing staff. We will maintain the trauma center, the radio room, the emergency room, all of our labor and delivery services, neonatal intensive care, med-surg. We do plan on scaling back elective surgeries perhaps as early as this Wednesday. We are begin our planning on Friday afternoon, and we'll continue on our planning and then actually implementing some of the elective admissions. We will have to scale back potentially as early as this Wednesday because the length of stay of some of our surgical patients could easily be 5 to 7 days on the very complicated orthopedic. Some of the neuro cases also can run a long time on post-operative. So we will begin working with the surgical staff and the other physicians to limit as much as possible to only urgent and semi-emergent cases beginning this Wednesday. That concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions your board may have.
Any questions from the board? Supervisor Wynn?
Just a question, Nino. We have a board meeting next Tuesday. I'm assuming that we'll have an update in regards to these current negotiations and the other bargaining units that we're working with. Is that correct?
That is correct, Supervisor Wynn.
Thank you.
Supervisor Elliott?
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned earlier the correction on the dates here. I'm curious if we need to change the beginning date to October 6th. In the board letter, it talks about having an orientation on October 6th, followed by 5 days of work. So shouldn't our period include October 6th?
Supervisor Elliott, through the chair, the actual financial commitment begins with pay. It's 5 12-hour shifts that we're required to pay through Health Source Global. The first day of pay would be then on the October 7th, Wednesday. There is reference to training, and that's going to be at Health Source Global's cost, and then we pay the nurses for their 12-hour shifts. In addition to that, then we do have other costs such as travel, and we have. I guess that would begin probably on. They'd have to travel before the 7th. You're correct about that. I'm going to have to defer to County Council. Mark, Miles, any thought on that? Just,
I don't have the contract here in front of me. The critical issue is that it's providing the funds that are necessary to acquire staff for a strike that's going to occur between those specific days. There may be some additional days that are involved, but the critical issue is just allocating and authorizing the funds necessary to acquire the staffing.
Okay, so then any other associated funds that are required to execute that 5-day contract then are just included. I mean, yeah, okay. Now, in the event that some nurses choose to continue to work, does that just reduce the number of nurses that would be hired then as replacements, or are we signing on to a block replacement?
Supervisor Elliott, at this point we are hiring on for a block replacement. So yes, it would be if our own nurses come, we will still have to pay. If our own nurses continue to work, we'll still have to pay HealthSource Global. Yes. Now, if we get some advance notice here, and again, we're working through this, the commitment that we have for each of these 5 12-hour shifts really begins on when the transportation actually begins. Typically, the replacement nurse is going to get on a plane. So if we can, if we understand there's a good number, or maybe not so good number, but a few nurses that might be able to continue working, we might be able to, toward the end of this 10-day notice, to call off some of the replacement. I think logistically that's going to be very difficult. I'm not certain we will get adequate notice of who plans on working and who won't. So I really do believe that if our own nurses continue to work, we'll continue to have to replace them also.
Okay, so then do we interpret this notice of intention to strike as being a notice of all 188 nurses?
Supervisor Elliott, actually, there's more than 188 nurses. It's the strike notice is for all representative nurses, those represented by the California Nurses Association, and we anticipate at this point all of them will be under that action. We are working with County Council, outside labor, to potentially get a limited number of number of nurses designated as essential, but that's an ongoing process. We went through back in March, or late February, early March, and we'll continue to do that right now. But this is a unit. I anticipate this to be a full unit action. The 188 are the minimum that we can staff with, again, based on lower census that we have.
Okay. No further questions at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from either Supervisor Villapudua or Supervisor Patty on the line?
Yes, I have a question, Chair. I'm just curious. So we spent $4 million last time, and we're going to spend another $4 million. Isn't it behoove us, just to, keep working on this instead of hiring these outside nurses?
I'm sorry, Supervisor Villapudua, I had a hard time hearing that. Could you repeat your question, please?
Yeah, I was just wondering. I mean, we're spending if they're going to go on strike again, or we're going to bring outside nurses, isn't it very expensive to do that? Why can't we just apply some of that money towards, working on some negotiations before they go on strike again? I mean, I don't know. I'm just curious. Why can't we just apply some of that money towards giving them a raise?
Ms. Nino?
Yes, thank you, Chair Miller. Supervisor Villapudua, we have a scheduled labor discussion with CNA scheduled for this Wednesday, I believe September 30th, and we will be at the table with them. We did reach out to them prior to receiving the strike notice to see if they would reconsider finishing up their strike vote and giving us issuing a strike notice to give us some time to see if we could get there with an agreed upon labor agreement. And they did not provide us with a positive response to that inquiry, because we would have preferred to have taken some time with them to have some discussions at the labor table before being issued the strike notice, but we were still issued the strike notice. And I believe this conversation took place either Thursday or Friday of last week. I'm being corrected. It did take place Friday with our lead negotiator.
Okay, thank you, Monica.
Supervisor Patty, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair Miller. An accounting question, so this might be something that Ms. Nino can answer. When the last strike occurred and we paid, I believe, $4 million was the same amount that we had allocated, what, for the nurses that didn't work and for the cost of bringing in replacement nurses, was there a savings in any way, or what was the difference if we would have continued during that same period of time versus the $4 million we spent?
Supervisor Patty, I do not know that number, but I will definitely have that number as part of my update to the board next Tuesday on October 6th.
That's a little challenging because we're right there at the deadline of when they're going to be issuing their strike and when we're executing a contract. Is there a guesstimate? And this is without holding anybody's feet to the cold here, but do you think we spent an extra $1 million or we saved $500,000? There's got to be an idea. Does Mr. Culberson know this?
Supervisor Patty, no, I don't. I'm trying to put some numbers together here quickly, and I don't have. There clearly was savings because of the nurses that did not come to work. We did not pay them, and they were not allowed to use their accrued time. But I don't know exactly that. I don't know the exact number. So, but we'll certainly work with Ms. Nino and her staff to provide that as quickly as possible.
Right. So question for you, and again, I'm trying to assess some information before we have a vote on anything here. So if we spent $4 million hiring temporary agency nurses to come in, did we save $2 million, and therefore it cost us only $2 million extra to do this? A couple of the public comment letters were talking about some numbers. I didn't quite write them down and follow them, but there's got to be some amount of staff that didn't come in, so therefore we didn't pay them versus what we spent on the temporary nurse staff.
Supervisor Patty, through the chair. Now, I think, let's see here, I can say that we have probably around 700,000, maybe 750,000 of this $4 million is actually, in the event SEIU continues on a sympathy action. I don't know what the, and I also looking at the way the contract is written, and there's about $1 million worth of housing and travel that would be associated with these 188 nurses. So that is, and I think the net wage costs are going to be about the same. By the time we add our costs, well, I take that back. There is a premium now because of COVID. Supervisor, I can't do the math quick enough, but I'd say there certainly will be some savings, but I can't tell you what that would be right now.
Okay.
But I will work with Ms. Nino's staff as quickly as possible to provide that.
Got it. So I would be in favor of something like this, and if you're going to be negotiating on Wednesday, maybe we can offer, throw this out there, but maybe we can offer $1 or $1.5 million of this $4 million as a 6-month. Let's see. Let's say we're buying time and an extension of negotiation, and instead of spending $4 million for travelers, we spend $1 million to supplement the current salaries of our staff, and we avoid the expense of travelers, we avoid a strike, and let's just buy a 6-month buffer of time to negotiate and come up to a resolution.
Supervisor Patty, this is Monica. I appreciate your insight. I would prefer us to have this discussion not in public because it's important as representing the county that we have a good faith bargaining session on Wednesday. I will definitely take your insight into consideration. What will be important is that when we update the board on 10/6, we will provide the board with what potentially those options are. Just off of my memory is what I recall when we last met with CNA, and it was the package that we had previously briefed the board with. That was not something that CNA was willing to consider at that time in February of 2020. But we will definitely take into consideration what you just stated, but I want to make sure that especially the public and the bargaining unit, that it is important for the county to be at the table, and we will be in a position of bargaining in good faith.
Understood. Okay. Yeah, I mean, we're having a public discussion about this, so I was wondering, where the savings are versus the incurred expense, as highlighted by many of the comments that were submitted today. So at some point we have to be able to reconcile this, and where does it make sense mathematically to go? And even if we look at a 6-month temporary extension with the current contract, with the good faith negotiation for a resolution within the next 6 months.
Understood. And that was, staff have had some overall discussions, and that's why our lead negotiator, Ms. Bennett, reached out to Mr. Schaefer to see if they would be willing to postpone their strike so that staff could have meaningful discussion with CNA at Wednesday's labor negotiations, and that did not come with a positive response from CNA.
Mm-hmm.
But we will still be meeting on September 30th.
So I have a question. How much time do we have scheduled for Wednesday for bargaining? Okay, so we have a lot of time.
I'll go ahead and answer that I don't know if that was picked up from the audience. Chair Miller, if I may.
Yes.
So there's afternoon on the 30th with carryover if needed for the next day.
Great. So we have a lot of time scheduled for this, which is very good. And what is the deadline to actually go live on this contract? So if it's approved today, what's the drop dead date that they need to be notified?
Chair Miller, they've already been notified once we received the notice on Saturday, so they're beginning their recruitment efforts right now, pulling together as many nurses, or 180 up to 188 as necessary. They are making travel plans and obtaining pre-bookings for hotels. I would say, for the most part, it would sound, I think where you would like us to go is that in the event something is the folks do not get on the plane, let's say on the 6th. Certainly by the 5th, we would have we'd have the administrative costs that we would bear to get everybody cleared, but we would not have the cost of actually the 5 12-hour shift days.
That's exactly what I'm looking for, is the plug can be pulled on this if our negotiations on Wednesday and Thursday are fruitful and result in a contract. There will be some administrative costs. I understand that. What I'm concerned about is I don't want us going into bargaining on Wednesday and Thursday with the attitude that because we've already approved this contract, we're going forward no matter what. I want to make sure that our team goes into that bargaining session in good faith with the goal of achieving a contract on Wednesday and Thursday. That's what I that is what my hope is, what my goal is. So I think in the long run, there's always additional costs with bringing in replacement workers. And so any administrative costs we bear in the process of getting to an agreement, from my standpoint, those are acceptable costs to bear because we won't have the additional costs then of replacing our own workers. So I have shared my concerns. The number that's been thrown out several times by the public that we have lost over 100 nurses since February, March, that we are starting to see a trend developing again of great difficulty in recruitment and retention. I want to make sure that all that is addressed on Wednesday and Thursday. I have a lot of confidence in our team. I agree with County Administrator. I believe good faith bargaining should take place at the table with both sides represented properly. I want to make sure that happens and that these issues are addressed, because that's different than what we have been hearing, the board has been hearing. That's definitely an increase in numbers. And so I just want to make sure that that is definitely addressed by our team.
Chair Miller, we will be addressing that.
Okay. Are there any other questions for staff? Supervisor Villapudua or Supervisor Patty, do you have any additional questions or comments?
I do not have any questions. Thank you.
So yes, Chairman, I do have a follow-up question. Supervisor Patty here. Do we have any information that could be shared right now on the difference between what their wages, what they're asking, and what is being paid regionally at the other area hospitals?
Through the chair, Supervisor Patty, under the Brown Act, when we have a special meeting, we're really narrowly restricted to the context of approving the agreement. I'm concerned that your question is getting a little far afield.
Understood. Okay, I was just curious. I know this is the things that we can discuss in maybe closed session. And later to be discussed in public, perhaps. I was just curious if we could have, if that was available to discuss at the moment.
We will follow up with you, Supervisor Patty.
And this will also be discussed at length on Wednesday and Thursday during the bargaining session, I am certain, in terms of salary surveys and all of that kind of information. I know that that's typically something that is discussed during negotiations. Correct? Okay. Then, given that we've received information that approval of this is not a lock-in, it simply keeps this option available to the board, but it should not hamper positive negotiations at the bargaining table on Wednesday and Thursday. Then I would look to the board for a motion on this item. Supervisor Elliott?
Thank you, Chair. I have just one additional comment on here. So during the public comment phase of the meeting today, we heard several allegations that there was some nefarious intent on the part of the Board of Supervisors to disrespect the nurses, not give them credit for the work that they've done. Someone mentioned union busting. Many times the question was asked, why would we spend money to hire replacement workers? It's very simple. I mean, it's common sense. It is our duty to maintain the operation of the county hospital and to do it in a safe fashion. Therefore, if we have received this notice that the nurses were going to be on strike, it is our duty to make sure that we have replacements to keep our hospital running, to provide for the safety and the health of the constituents of the county who may need those services. It's got nothing to do with union busting. It's a matter of performing the responsibilities that we have. So I just wanted to make that clear. And I don't think it's appropriate during this meeting to try to negotiate a new contract. That should be done during the appropriate negotiation sessions. So I just wanted to air that and assure folks that that's what we're doing with this action today, is to ensure that we can maintain the operation of the hospital and ensure the safety and health of the constituents of the county. So we know that this is a contingency only. It depends upon the union. If they insist on having a lockout, then we must provide replacement workers. That's all there is to it. So with that, I would move approval of the item.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Clerk, could we have a voice vote, please?
Supervisor Villapudua,
Yes.
Supervisor Patty,
Yes.
Supervisor Wynn,
Yes.
Supervisor Elliott,
Yes.
and Chair Miller.
Yes. Okay, that is approved then 5-0. And that being the only business before the board today, we are adjourned until next Tuesday, October 6th at 9 a.m.